Ooh. Ah. Mmm. Oh, I'm definitely going.
Sorry, what was that?
These shorts are a perfect fit on me. It's so hard to find stuff that fits me.
Oh, so yeah, and why is that?
I'm a little, curvy.
What do you mean?
Some clothes are a bit of a tight fit on me.
Oh, why?
Because I have, strong legs.
I'm sorry, we're gonna go back. I don't understand.
Look, my gluteus maximus is larger than a typical man of my height, okay? I don't know if it's the dancing or all my squats at the gym, but I'm a bit thick and I can't help it.
Sorry, well, did you say something? I have my headphones in. I'm in a work meeting.
Oh no, nothing. Your mic isn't on, is it?
Well, it's muted now, but it was. I've been talking to them for like the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, great, yeah. Hey, James, could you quit your job, like, now, or...
An actual recording from our lives.
The fantasy of Walt and James living in a house and being married, question mark?
The theory keeps on going. Everyone knows we've lived together at least once. The question is it still occurring?
Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC and POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James. All right, no segue.
No segue?
I know that it's coming. We're up to what episode? What now?
25?
Wow.
26?
A quarter of the way to a century. It's pretty good.
Wow, good one.
Yeah, nice. So
celebrate.
We've got we know how this works. We know how this deal.
We can see the transmission. It's incoming from the deep depths of the galaxy from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Mana is a crucial resource within any Commander game. Consequently, you must take great care in ensuring that the cards within your deck follow a well-reasoned mana curve to arrive at its destination in a timely manner.
Ooh, mechanical episode.
We've
not done one of these in a while.
No.
We've talked a lot about like band cards recently. We talked about play groups.
That's 6 hours of band cards.
Yeah, it was a lot. But
Thanks
now we know them all.
We do.
We do know
We did
them
all of them, which is a bit of an achievement.
Big shout out. And a huge shout out to all of you listeners as well that jumped in our Discord and engaged in conversation with us about what you think should be banned.
Yeah.
That was a really good discussion.
Lots of really, really good thoughts were thrown around. Always look forward to the discussion that we get there. I don't think anything's going to be as contentious as the ban list, but maybe some of the stuff we say about this will be contentious because we're talking about mana curve. That was the specific wording they used in the command.
And people have some pretty strong opinions on what their mana curve should look like. Well, I mean, even Wizards of the Coast themselves, when you get like pre-release kits, there's usually like that little flyer that tells you how to build your mana curve.
It does too. It tells you have roughly this many 3-drops, this many 4-drops. Yeah. I mean, look, it makes sense, right? The two main resources that we use in Magic, aside from our brains, is
and actual money.
Yeah. Yes, is mana and cards, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of like almost all aspects of the game can eventually break themselves down into how much mana does it cost to do, how many cards does it cost to do, how many cards does it like reduce my opponents down,
how long do I have to wait until I can cast this card with the amount of mana I have,
how much mana does my opponent have right now, what kind of answers can they have. It's like it's integral to the game that we play, right?
100%.
So yeah, why do we care about mana curve? Because we have to be managing our mana throughout literally the entire of a game of Commander. Like from turn 1 onwards, we are looking at how much mana we have. we are trying to, ideally use pretty much all of our mana every turn, right? That's kind of the goal, right?
I think it was actually Josh Lee Kwai that said, like, they did a bit of research and looked at all of their Command Zone Game Nights games.
Yep.
And they kind of calculated that, on average, the person that spent the most mana generally won the game.
Yes.
And yeah, when you're saying, like, how integral it is to the game, Walt, I actually, like, just thought, when someone asked me, oh, why are you interested in this game, Magic the Gathering? What's so cool about it? What is the actual game? When I get asked what the actual game is, my default setting of answering it is, it's a resource management game. And
really?
Yeah, that's how I usually respond.
It's accurate. I totally agree, but yeah.
You have a set of resources in your library. You have a set of resources that you can incrementally gain depending on how long the game goes for. You can accelerate that.
That's true.
It's really interesting. And I think in Commander, more than anywhere else in Magic, it is really strongly seen about how important it is.
Well, we get more turns, I think, is the really important one. And we're often going to be casting like bigger spells later in the game, but we're also going to want to sequence our games together. So in order to sort of illustrate how important this mana curve is, when you think about the last game of Commander where you sort of like did really well, like you won or you came really close to winning or whatever.
That was about 4 years ago to me.
And think about which turns, if any, did you fail to cast a spell?
Okay. Yeah, all right.
It's pretty rare, right? Like in a game that you do well, almost every turn of the game you're casting at least one spell. And usually, like, when I think about how many spells I'm casting as well, the second question I have here is, in later turns, did you cast one spell per turn or more than one? The answer is almost always more than one. Once it gets to like turn 6 or 7, I'm casting like minimum 2 spells a turn.
Unless it's one of those absolutely, if this spell resolves, I win the game, kind of like Rise of the Dark Realms kind of spell. Like
totally. Yeah, in Garrick's Wake,
one of those
the big splashy I win thing. Yeah, but aside from that, like every turn of the game we want to be casting spells.
Yeah.
And ideally we want to cast as many as possible. So yeah, we sort of need to design our curve. And when I say mana curve, by the way, it's called that because when you lay out the cards, like if you do this physically with the cards in your deck,
which I still occasionally do on my playmat when I'm building a deck.
I'm too much of a Moxfield fan to do it any other way now. But you lay out like the cards in your deck that cost 1 mana value, that cost 2, that cost 3, that cost 4, and ideally there should be a bit of a curve here, and it's kind of like a bell curve where
there's a median, an average.
Yeah, there's a middle section that's sort of the hump, and in Commander, I think most decks it should be roughly 3 mana value. Should probably be the most represented part of the curve.
3.25 maybe somewhere around there. Yeah.
We'll get into the stats a bit later, but some decks might want to go a little bit lower than that. And I will say as well that like, unlike a standard bell curve, like a symmetrical bell curve, I don't think that it should be symmetrical on either side of 3. Like, if 3 is the peak of this curve, I think most of my decks that play really well, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this as well, are more sort of bottom heavy. Like after 3, probably the most represented number would be 2, right? And then 1 and 4 are about the same.
And it slowly peters off, and when you get to like the 5, 6, there's like 1 or 2 cards in the entire deck that sit there.
And 7 might be like 1, 8 might be 1,
For our Australian listeners, if you're not really 100% following on what a bell curve is, I'll give you a really easy way to remember what a bell curve is. Your ATAR sat on a bell curve. There you go. But like the ATAR bell curve, right? For anyone outside of Australia, ATAR is like the GCSE, the A levels, the American one, which I forget the name of.
It's the one that you use in uni. It's like a 4. It's like 4 is like the highest, right?
GPA?
GPA. Yeah, that's GPA.
But anyway, like these are specifically designed to give you like a median average that sits exactly in the middle. So like in Australia, an ATAR goes anywhere from 0 to like 99.95.
It's a percentile, actually. Yeah,
it's a percentile. So 50 is that median. It's right slap bang in the middle. But for us, we'll tend to see what's mathematically known as a tail on the bell curve. It will kind of peter out, and there'll be what's on the other side, closer to the 1 and 2 drops, is the head. And then the tail at the other end, the 7, 6 kind of area.
Oh my god, did you study this or something?
I did too. I did 2 very intense statistics subjects at uni, and I'm glad that I finally get to talk about it. $30,000 well spent.
It's testament to how rarely I hear you talk about your degree that I just said all that stuff about statistics and never once thought to ask you, oh, James, could you tell me about statistics?
Oh god, there were some intense subjects, I have to admit. But like,
I've heard some horror stories about statistics subjects at uni.
They're pretty brutal, but like once you understand like how data works, it is such an open door to like thinking about so many things.
It's really important, right?
And genuinely, we are going to break it down in this episode based on data. I know that you've done a lot of prep work for this episode.
I have not.
We just got
the command from the Space Commanders.
You read the email before we sit down in this podcast studio.
Don't call me out like that,
Space
James.
Commanders, he's prepping. This is unfair.
Oh my god, I'm rising into the air. I'm being beamed up!
Actually stood up just then as well. It was brilliant.
I did not stand up. I was beamed.
And you were floating. Your feet were off the ground.
Yes, exactly.
But we are going to break it down quite like on a granular level. There's a lot of data to back this up, and the sample sizes are actually like our own decks.
Yeah.
We're really excited for this one.
Absolutely we are. And like the reason we're so excited about it is because I think that this is like such an underrated part of what will contribute to, I mean, we say at the beginning of the episode, we want you to have better games of Commander. I really think being able to use your mana efficiently, and the way to do that is having a good mana curve.
Yeah.
Is what's going to give you better games of Commander. I think it has a really strong effect. As I was doing some digging, because I did read the email, okay. I sort of uncovered some stuff in the stats of my decks and was like, wow, that actually explains a lot about why some of my decks feel like this to play.
Yeah.
And some feel like this.
100%.
Yeah, I think it's just so important.
Even when I look at like newer players' decks that ask me like, oh, can you give me some advice around this? I'm like, all right, well, firstly, you've got 10 5-drops here.
Yeah.
How often are you casting these? They're like, oh, maybe like once a game. I'm like, okay, do you need 10 of them?
Yes.
Like, you know, it's so crucial, and I think it's such a important thing for all Commander players, both experienced and brand new, to understand and break down, because we're going to go into like the general stuff, and we're even going to talk about like the higher level stuff when you're playing a deck that maybe breaks the rules a little bit. Like
absolutely.
that Kung Fu metaphor we used in the
yeah, you got to know the rules if you want to break them. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I totally agree with what you said about new players especially loving these big bomb cards at 7 and 6 mana value. And I think if any of you have ever watched one of those pre-con upgrade videos on YouTube, you'll know that when they're showing you, because often they do like 10 cards that they take out and 10 cards that they put in, almost always like 5, 6, 7 of the cards that they're taking out of the deck in order to find room for the upgrades are the 6 and 7 mana value spells, because you're just not going to get to cast them very often.
And honestly, if you resolve one of them, it should be putting you in a position where the game's going to close out. You shouldn't need to cast another one.
Yes. And this is the other thing I think about lower mana value spells, and this is why that curve we want it to be stacked towards the bottom, is it gives you more options, right? Like if you think about a hand that you have that has, let's say, I don't know, it's turn 6 and you've cast you play a land every turn, so you've got 6 mana.
Yeah, so you're on curve, as we will refer to it.
Yes, exactly. I want to think about 2 different hands, like examples of a hand that you have when you have 6 mana on this turn.
Sure.
One of them you have only 4 mana value and 5 mana value spells. So like, what can you do with a hand? If you've got 6 mana and you have only 4 mana value or 5 mana value spells...
You'll have to choose one of them. You can't do both.
Yeah.
So you have to choose like a spell to cast that turn.
And you're also going to not use all your mana, right? You literally can't. You could cast a 5-drop and then you only have 1 left over, but you're not even using that last mana, and you don't have anything else in your hand to use it on.
Maybe you leave 2 blue open and try and bluff your way in a counterspell.
That's the James guarantee.
That's the James guarantee, yeah.
But let's think about a different hand.
Sure.
So again, we have 6 mana value, but this hand has a 2-drop, some 3-drops, a 4-drop, and a 5-drop.
I got options.
You've got
I got options.
You've got multiple different options.
Well, you could go 5-drop, 1-drop. You could go 2 3-drops. You could go 2 3 and a 1.
Yeah, like you could go 4-drop, 2-drop.
Whatever the board state calls for. If you've got like a single target removal in your hand and a creature that you want to play out, fantastic. Remove the threat and play your creature out. If you've got a game-winning spell at the 5-drop zone, like maybe an Overwhelming Stampede, run it out now, eliminate a player. Like, I think, having those options is so crucial. And I think we did go into depths about this in our deck building episode, a little bit more detailed in around like the win con kind of cards.
Yes, we definitely did. And something else that we talked about in the deck building episode, which is actually going to be really closely tied to mana curve, is ramp. So for those who are super new, when we use the word ramp, we're referring to anything that lets you have more mana on your turn or subsequent turns than you otherwise would have if you just played a land every turn, right? So on that example, let's say I was at turn 6 and I had 6 mana. That doesn't always have to be the case, and often in Commander that's not going to be the case. If you play your Arcane Signet, or your Soul Ring, or even a spell that gets lands out of your deck, like Rampant Growth or Explosive Vegetation, you might get to turn 5 and have 7 mana, 8 mana, 9, 10, like the possibilities are almost endless in Commander. And I think that this is going to be really closely tied to how we build our mana curve, right? Because we preach a lot about the importance of 2 mana value ramp spells, right?
Yes.
Like, we love our Arcane Signets, we love our, even Charcoal Diamond, Sky Diamond kind of things.
And by comparison, we hate those 3 mana ramp spells that don't actually ramp you enough.
Yes.
So like a 3 mana rock in comparison to Arcane Signet, which is 2 mana rock that taps for any color, it's 1 mana more expensive, and it's taking 1 mana out of your pile of resources that doesn't really do anything else.
Yes, exactly right. And the sort of general rule of thumb that we proposed in the deck building episode, and this is kind of, you'll hear this a lot online, is that generally speaking, your ramp should give you at least half as much mana as what you spent to cast it. So Arcane Signet's a great example. You spent 2 mana to cast it. It gives you 1 on every subsequent turn.
Thran Dynamo is another good one. 4 generic mana gives you 3, so it actually gives you 1 extra.
That one's a really good example of that's going to fit your curve really well because it also is untapped. So on the turn you cast it, you might be able to chain that into something else, and that's always going to feel really good.
And just to differentiate as well, because I know there was a big amount of discussion on our Discord about this, the definitions of fast mana and then what we referred to as burst ramp, which was probably a bit of a confusing term on our half because there's burst card draw and all this kind of stuff. But to clarify again, when we're talking about fast mana, this is mana that gives you more mana than was spent to cast it.
Yes.
So, for example, really good example, Soul Ring is a brilliant example. 1 generic mana gives you 2 colorless mana. A Mana Crypt is 0 mana to cast and gives you 2 generic colorless mana. This is what we call fast mana. So it gives you more than you use to cast it. Maybe there's some downside like Mana Crypt where you flip a coin and maybe take 3.
Sure.
Then there's what we referred to in our deck building episode in Ramp, where we referred to it as Burst Ramp.
Yes.
Now, we kind of said rituals are an example of Burst Ramp.
Sure. So like Desperate Ritual for 1 and a red, it's an instant that adds red to your mana pool. So it is actually, in that example of fast mana, you are getting more mana than you spent to cast it.
It is technically fast mana.
But the reason we differentiated that from Soul Ring and Mana Crypt and put it in this burst ramp category is because we wanted to be really clear that mana goes away.
It is temporary.
It's temporary. That turn, you get more mana than you had. And look, like, we're not saying you shouldn't play rituals, because in certain decks where you can copy the spell or you want to cast a really, really big X spell or something, rituals are going to be great. You should definitely play them.
They're fantastic. And then we had this great discussion in the Discord where do treasures sit then? They're a little bit of a halfway house. I'm not going to continue the conversation here. Let's continue it on Discord.
Sure.
But just so we can clarify what we mean by ramp and fast mana and burst ramp.
And mostly when we say ramp as well, we're referring to the longer term forms of ramp, right? Like, we're talking about the mana rocks, the signets, that kind of thing, and the lands that we get out of our deck. And even mana dorks as well. So I wanted to actually call back a bit to that deck building episode and talk about a really interesting thread that actually has raised some discussion in the Discord as well, which was made by Sam Black.
I remember this.
Yes. So he's a professional Magic player. He's got a really wonderful podcast that I highly recommend called Drafting Archetypes. He's a really fantastic limited player. But he weighed in on Twitter on his thoughts on mana rocks specifically, and he started the tweet with the typical impression grabbing thing of saying that he thought that mana rocks were traps. He did not say, I'm going to be really clear here, he didn't say don't play mana rocks, he didn't say they're bad, he said they're traps, and he specifically pointed out that he thought that players were probably playing too few lands and too many mana rocks. And I want to break down his position a little bit again, because I feel sometimes when people have been talking to me about this since we released this episode,
there's been a lot of discussion around this.
A lot of it. It's really interesting, and I've really enjoyed the discussion, but some people are probably they need to refer back to the thread, because they're slightly misrepresenting where Sam Black is coming from. So I wanted to clarify his position again. So what he said was, mana rocks are traps, not that they're bad. He said that they're easily removed and don't contribute meaningfully to your strategy, the board state, life totals, like anything that basically gets you closer to a win, except mana. They obviously give you mana, he's not contesting that, but in terms of your board state, like if you're playing an aristocrat deck, they're not creatures, right? They're not a creature you can sacrifice, they're not a blood artist, they're not anything that's contributing to your strategy, they're just giving you mana.
Obviously, there are decks that they are part of your strategy, like big mana decks or artifact decks, but go on.
Absolutely. So then he said that he thought that many commanders would prefer to play high impact, low mana value spells instead of those rocks. And he gave a few examples of like, in this kind of a deck, I reckon I would rather have a low drop creature because I care about my creature count. I'm milling creatures into my graveyard.
I think Nested Shambler was one of the ones he used as an example. Like Nested a 1-drop 1/1.
Yeah, it's in one of his decks. He rates it super highly. That's a 1-mana 1/1, but that when it dies makes a 1/1. But he's sort of making this argument of like, I think in the longevity of the game, if I build my curve right, this is where it's coming into it, that's going to contribute more to my win than a mana rock would.
And it's going to drive my road to victory that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Importantly, he did not apply this universally to the concept of ramp. This was specifically mana rocks. He differentiated quite clearly this from playing land ramp, like rampant growth, explosive vegetation, that kind of thing, and mana dorks, because he said both of those can be integrated into your strategy, and he felt that he had two separate arguments. He said that lands are like never touched in casual commander, so you don't have to worry about them being removed, which is, I think we both agree with.
I got a Cleansing Wildfire in my deck, but not on a basic forest. I'm not hitting a basic forest so they can get a basic forest.
Exactly right. And then he said with mana dorks, they are contributing to a board state. They are blockers. They can attack. They can
be sacrificed.
Like these are contributing to your strategy. So, one thing that he did do in that thread, and this is where I want to tie it into this concept of mana curve, and especially when we talk about ramp, is he shared his Moxfield decks. And I've actually linked this in the show notes if any of you want to go take a look. Really interesting. So here's what his Rafine deck looked like. And for reference, I'm specifically choosing this deck because Sam pointed it out in the thread of being like, here's an example of one of my decks that I've built using this strategy of playing
more impactful low drop spells.
Exactly. Yeah. So what did the deck look like? Well, on Moxfield, it gives you an idea of the average mana value of the spells in your deck, which is really interesting.
Scroll down just below the list of cards. It's right there.
Yeah. It's it also shows you the mana curve exactly. Yeah. So we love Moxfield, obviously. And his average mana value was 2.69 in this Rafine deck. For those who don't track their decks very closely, this is really low.
It is really low. I don't track it super close, but 2.69 even feels low to me.
Most decks, we'll find out a bit later, but they sit between 3 and 4. That's pretty common for a casual deck. So being below 3 is significant. 2.769 is quite low.
It is very low.
He's running 45 lands, not shocking. That's specifically what he was talking about. He wanted more lands and no mana rocks that I could see. He also had, and this is a really crucial one, a lot of 2 mana value spells in his deck. To the extent where, you know how earlier I said, and I think we agreed that mostly the deck should be 3 drops, like the most represented mana value.
And the next one should be 2?
Yeah, his was the other way around. His most represented mana value was 2. I think it was then followed by 3, and then 1. There was more 1 drops than 4 drops.
And like 4, 5, 6 is just like
almost nothing at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then I was really interested in this, and I liked looking at the deck, and then I was like, hold on. Moxfield has a playtest feature.
Moxfield has everything.
Moxfield does have everything. And I was like, I didn't realize that you could playtest other people's decks. Like if it's a public list.
I've playtested your decks
before. Have you really?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, I'm flattered. I'm absolutely flattered.
I'm currently trying to build an aristocrat strategy, and I'm using your Marchesa as a bit of a basis.
I'm legitimately flattered. Thank you.
I mean, we did a whole episode on it, and I still need some help.
Anyway, so I used the playtest feature on Sam's Rafine deck.
Cool.
Just to check it out.
How did you go?
I played like 10 games. Played.
Goldfish.
On my own.
Yeah. Walt plays Commander with all his friends, sits at his computer and uses goldfishing.
And thinks about Sam Black. So, here's some of the things I noticed. You always have a play by turn 2. And often you have a play on turn 1. Which, by the way, I can't say about... I've playtested a lot of my decks, Goldfish a lot of my decks. I can't say that about a lot of my Commander decks.
No, weirdly, I've just been playtesting my Tornos Artifacts deck recently.
Yeah.
And the only 2 1-drops in the deck are Sol Ring and Golden Urn, which weirdly has come out more often than not. And that card is really, really good.
In this weird charge cannons build that you have, it's actually gained you so much life. I reckon it gained you... In the games I've played with you, I reckon it's gained you like 50 life at this point.
No, there was one game the other night where I did gain about 50 life.
Did you really?
It sat...
It must be around the 100 mark then.
I ended up proliferating a bunch onto Golden Urn. Golden Urn, for clarity, it's a 1-drop that every upkeep you put a charge counter on it and you sacrifice it and gain life equals the number of charge counters on it. But with Tornos, you can copy that ability.
Yes.
So I managed to get it up to about 20-something charge counters by proliferating and moving counters around and stuff like that.
And then he copied the ability with Tornos.
Yeah, it's pretty good. 50 life is not bad.
It's the first time you played it, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of like, James, what are you doing?
And then you swing at me and I'm like, all right, in response, gain 50.
It's kept you alive, literally in games where you would otherwise have died. Super cool.
Impactful 1-drop in my decks. There you go. Sam Black, listening, buddy.
I'm totally with you though in that, like, that was two cards in that deck, right, that were 1-drops. Most of my decks are at a similar kind of spot where most of the cards, again, are 3s. There's a few 2s, almost no 1s.
Yeah, and most of the 2-drops are probably mana rocks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing that I found is that, on turn 2, you had a play literally every time. I can't say it about even my decks that have lots of 2 mana rocks. I can't say that by turn 2 I always have a play. I don't think that's in all of my decks.
No, I don't think I would say that about my decks either. And and when you say a play, it's not like, oh, I'm playing my Arcane Signet, because there wasn't an Arcane Signet in that deck. So you're playing a creature that is progressing that Rafine deck strategy.
Yeah.
That's sick.
Yeah, super cool. I almost never missed a land drop, or, not until it was irrelevant. Like, I always hit my 6th land drop, for instance. Like,
which, at that point, you're now casting 3-4 spells a turn.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with this mana.
Yeah, exactly.
By the time I reached the high mana value spells, this was really interesting. I had a board that could use them. And this was something that I found really fascinating, is like, so much of the time we ramp into these spells that sit at the top of our curve, but so you sort of alluded to this earlier, so many of the spells that sit at the top of our mana curve, the 7 mana spells, the 6 mana spells, are spells that are supposed to win you the game.
Like a Rise of the Dark Realms needs a graveyard full to have it set up to win.
Exactly. Even a Craterhoof Behemoth needs a certain number of creatures before they're big enough to swing for the win, right?
I get what you're saying.
So, like, ramping into those spells actually doesn't feel very good. Ramping into other spells can be fine, but, like, hitting those doesn't feel so good. Whereas, by the time I had 7 lands, and I cast, in this case, I think, like, the only 7-drop in his deck was Elishnorn Grand Cenobite.
Oh, the original white
Elishnorn? The original Elishnorn that gives your creatures +2/+2, everyone else's creatures -2/-2.
Yeah, even the old Elishnorn was terrible.
Yeah, horrifying. I had the board that I had by then typically had 6-7 creatures on it, and that huge.
Actually gained you a lot of value, because now they're blub blub blub, all huge creatures.
Exactly.
Nice.
The one big caveat I will offer in terms of when I was looking at this deck. The mana base cost alone in the Rafine deck about $2,000.
Because Rafine's 3 colours, right?
It is. It's Esper. So it's black, white, blue is the 3 pips you need to cast as well.
in 3-color decks, when we ramp, we also tend to fix as well. Because an Arcane Signet taps for any colour.
Yeah, in a 3-color deck, that's a rock that produces either white, black, or blue.
Or even in a deck where you're casting a Rampant Growth, you look at your mana and go, what colour do I need? And I can go get that and fix the ramp. Exactly. So you're saying, to compensate that, Sam had to go, right, all those dual lands that I have in my binder are going in this.
I think I would disagree slightly with the word compensate, because I think he just owns them all. So
he doesn't
even think of it, right? He's just like, okay, I'm building a 3-color mana base. Oh, I'll throw in a scrubland. Like, that's just like
throw in a scrubland.
That's just how he's thinking about it, right? But yes, if you are not someone who possesses dual lands in vast quantities, as a budget player, I did realize I was kind of like, oh yeah, my mana rocks, exactly right, like Arcane Signet.
They fix you.
They fix my mana, especially in like 3-color decks. So yeah, I don't know how well the 45 land no mana rocks thing would work if you were on a budget mana base, especially in 3+ colors, because I'm kind of like,
what did you say? $2,000.
$2,000.
That was the deck.
That was the mana base.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
That was just the mana base.
Okay.
Just the lands. Just 45 lands.
Sorry, I thought you meant the deck.
No.
That's just the lands?
The lands were $2,000.
Holy hell.
Yes. So, like, that's not budget friendly.
No, it's not. Okay, wow.
I'm not saying you wouldn't be able to have a good 3-color mana base in a budget deck, but I think you would need at least some, like, land ramp or fixing, like, even an Arcane Signet or something.
Being in green would really help you.
Green would be fine. I think you'd be fine in green, because, again, you'd be doing land ramp, which is not under this Sam Black umbrella of Mana Rocks being a trap. But yeah, that's a big drawback.
That is a huge drawback.
Yeah. So, like, okay, that's like a big rundown on Sam Black and how his deck works.
I'm glad we actually laid it out properly.
I wanted to give it the time of day because I think it's really interesting, and I think a lot of people immediately dismissed him, and I'm kind of like, guys, when a pro Magic player tells you something, listen. Like,
this guy's got trophies on his shelves.
You don't have to agree, but don't just like people are just misrepresenting him, and I'm like, come on, like at least like contest his points that he's actually made.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the long and the short of that is, do you want Mana Rocks? If so, we're excluding Mana Dorks, and we're excluding land ramp, like Ramp of Growth, that kind of thing. Do you want rocks in your commander decks? I think it depends.
Well, yeah, of course it depends. There's a bunch of questions you could even ask yourself when you're going about that question of, do I want Mana Rocks in my deck or even ramp in my deck?
Yeah.
It's, okay, what does your commander do?
Yes.
And is it crucial to the strategy? So how quickly do you want your commander to come out?
Yeah, I think this is the crucial question, is when. When does your commander want to hit the battlefield?
If you hit it on curve, a lot of commanders that we see these days are like 6 mana. So do you want to be casting your commander on turn 6, or do you want to be casting that 6-drop commander on turn 4?
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
And we'll go through some examples to illustrate what you mean, because there's some commanders, like they sort of fit broadly into 2 camps, I think, commanders, where there's some commanders that are like the sort of grease that gets the cogs whirring in your deck.
The engine.
Yeah, they're the kind of thing that fuels the fire. And there's some commanders that want to be the big finisher.
Like the win con in the deck is actually in the command zone.
It's like set up all the pieces, cast your commander, maybe not win on the spot, but like a lot happens when you get your commander out.
I can think of a couple of my commanders that sit in each camp.
Yeah, so let's run through some recent. I just went on EDH Rec and looked at some of the most played commanders recently. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, hopefully that means that we'll be talking about some of the listeners'
some of the stuff that you have out there. Yeah. So, first one, Mirim. I think that's how you say it. Sentinel Worm. This is the
Temur Dragon
tribal thing. I think it's like a 5-mana creature that has Ward 2, and it says whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you make a token that's a copy of that dragon, except it's not legendary.
Why did it have to have that
You
text?
can play a legendary dragon and get a copy of it. It's wild. It also, I think it gives your dragons Ward 2. Oh no, it just has Ward 2.
Which, again, it's... Oh, yeah, wild. I've played against this commander. It is a very, very strong commander.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really strong commander because once it is down, it is absolutely driving your deck to the victory lane. And I think in this deck, you want Mirim to come out as quickly as possible because then all of your dragons that you cast subsequently are going to be double the value.
Yeah, I mean... Double
the value.
The thing to keep in mind about this is, like, every dragon we're casting before Mirim in this deck is kind of like a missed opportunity, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Like, we're getting that one dragon, but we're missing out on the possibility of having 2. So, yeah, I think in this deck, we probably, like most dragon decks, we want to ramp a lot.
Yeah.
And we want to ramp really, really quickly. In this case, we are in green, so we don't necessarily need to play rocks. We could just play Ramp of Growth, Farseek,
but
that kind of
thing.
thing.
In our curve, we want our lower drop spells to be acceleration.
Definitely.
So we can get to that game plan. And also thinking about it, like, dragons on average are generally pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And because this deck wants to play dragons, your game plan is naturally expensive. So fill your lower end of your mana curve with the acceleration so you can start activating the turn 6 usual play on turn 4.
Yeah, definitely. Completely agree. Next one on the list is Ishin. 2 Heavens as One.
No, we've recently played against a couple of these decks.
we have.
We've had some experiences with Ishin.
Some wildly different experiences when you play against an Ishin deck. So for reference, it's the Mardu commander, so it's red, black, white, and that's actually the mana cost. It's white, black, red.
Yeah, just 3 mana.
Just 3 mana. I think he's like a 3/4. It's irrelevant. It says whenever if a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers twice instead, basically.
Which seems like, oh yeah, that's pretty decent. No, this is a really strong effect.
There's so many ways to build it. I really enjoy, our good friend Daniel has a version of this list that's about like...
It's goading. It's like goad tribal.
Yeah. Because then when things are goaded, if they trigger your stuff, then that happens twice. Because you don't have to control the permanent that's triggering twice. It just has to be attacking. And that has to trigger one of your permanents.
Yes. So for example, if you have, like, Karazakar is a really strong card in that deck. Example. It's whenever your opponents attack one of your opponents, you and the opponent attacking each draw a card and lose a life.
Yes.
But with Karazakar down with Ishin, it doubles. So you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life.
Yes.
This is ridiculously good.
Yeah. Lots of really cool value things that happen. I think Ishin is an example of a commander that wants to come out late, but... It also sits in a really interesting camp of only costing 3 mana. Yeah. So I could totally see an argument for an Ishin deck that plays like almost no ramp. Really.
I see that because like a lot of the pieces in the deck as well, like I'm actually really interested to get some lists of Ishin players. I know a lot of you that we've played with play Ishin. So Daniel, a couple of other people that have these decks, please chuck them in the Discord. I want to have a look because I think a lot of the key pieces, Karazakar is a bit expensive.
Karazakar's 5. Yeah. It's not super expensive, but more than...
But a lot of the stuff that's like all your creatures have melee or have Exalted is a really good one that has
Exalted come out really quickly,
Some Exalted triggers are on lands.
Yeah,
like,
true.
It's pretty insane. So, I can see a world where Ishin could live without ramp.
Yeah, or at the very least, he's coming out late, and he doesn't cost very much, so, like, you don't need ramp. You could 100% play if you wanted to. You could play like a super high mana value dragon Ishin deck if you wanted to, but in general, you don't need the ramp to cast him, and you don't want to cast him till later anyway.
I'll tell you what is an incredibly good 1-drop ramp spell you could put in Ishin.
Sure.
Curse of Opulence.
Oh!
Man, that card would be wicked in Ishin.
That's a sick include, actually.
Okay, Curse of Opulence is one of my all-time favourite cards.
You always curse me with it.
Why wouldn't I? So, for reference, it's 1 red for an aura curse. You enchant target player, and whenever you or one of your opponents attack that enchanted player, you make a treasure token, and the person attacking makes... Oh, no, it's a gold token,
it's actually a gold token,
Even better than treasure, because you don't have to tap it to sacrifice it.
No, you don't.
Mana. It's really, really strong. So in Ishin, this triggers twice.
Yep.
So realistically, in your Ishin deck, if this is like your only piece of mana acceleration, oh my god, it's going to accelerate you pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, that's going to be 2 gold every time that person's attacked, and you're going to be attacking that person and getting 2 gold a turn. Yeah, that's wild.
And it's a really strong incentive for your opponents to attack because they will also get 2 gold.
That's true.
So like if I cursed you with this and my Ishin deck, I would just be like, hey, do you want 2 gold? Go swing at Walt.
That is a strong incentive.
That's a really good attack.
Wow. Good one. Good shout out. The next one on this list is very different mechanically than Ishin. Will Help the Rock Cleaver. I think this was at the head of a pre-con deck, right? Yeah.
So from Midnight Hunt.
Yes, that seems right. It's a zombie tribal thing. Basically, it says... I think at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice as a zombie and draw a card.
Yes, and also whenever a zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, make a 2/2 zombie with Decayed.
Yes, so you kind of build this as like an aristocracy zombie tribal thing.
And it's really strong.
Yeah, I mean, drawing a card in the end step is like amazing.
Yeah.
What do you reckon? Do you think you would want lots of ramp in a Will Help deck?
Well, I mean, look... I play Will Help in my Scarab God deck. And my Scarab God deck usually has a lot of bomb creatures, which I cheat out onto the battlefield.
Sure.
So I do have quite a bit of ramp in my deck, so in case Scarab God doesn't come out or it gets removed a lot, I can still cast these bombs to get the wheels turning.
Sure.
But I think isolating Will Help down... There are a lot of just really cheap zombies that you can just cast in the early game.
Gravecrawler.
Gravecrawler keeps coming back too. Like
Relentless Dead. Like there's quite a few of these very commonly played zombie tribal cards that cost 1-2 mana.
Even some of the really good zombie tribal cards, like I think it's Curse of the Relentless Dead. It's a enchantment that at the beginning of your upkeep you make X zombies, where X is the number of zombies halved you control.
Oh yeah, great card.
That's a 4-drop. It's actually really cheap when you think about the effect that it's having in a tribal deck like this. I can see a world where you might not prioritize mana rocks or low mana curve ramp really, really hard in this deck. Purely for the fact that I think that Will Help will come down later in the game and accelerate your pieces. Because once you know, in the first 3 turns, 4 turns, you're putting down cheap zombies. Then you cast Will Help. Now you can sacrifice them to draw a card and create a 2/2. That's some good value.
Definitely. You definitely wouldn't want a Will Help out without a zombie to sacrifice, right? Like,
What's his mana cost again?
He's 4. He's 2 blue-black.
So first 3 turns, you cast a 1-drop zombie, 2-drop zombie, 3-drop zombie.
Yeah.
Then you cast him, sacrifice 1, draw a card, start refilling your hand.
Yeah.
And you make another body. This feels strong.
He's interesting because he's the engine, but he also requires that you have zombies first. So he's kind of like that mid-game sort of commander. But you do need the zombies first. So I'm with you. I think you could probably go without ramp, or not a lot of ramp in this deck.
I think obviously if you're building your deck to do a really big splashy kind of game ending, like flood the board with zombies like Army of the Damned or a Rise of the Dark Realms, you need to include some ramp in your deck so you can get to that win con at an earlier point.
Definitely.
Because as we know, commander games don't last till turn 10.
No, not often. The next one is quite a recent commander. It's Henzi, quote, Toolbox Tor? Not quite sure how to say that. This is the Jund.
Red, black, green.
Yeah. I think it costs red, black, green. Maybe,
so it's 3-drop.
Yeah. It reduces, I think it says, what does it do? It gives it... Okay, I'm going to attempt it and then you can read it properly.
I'm getting Scryfall up.
It reduces the cost of creatures with power 4 or mana value 4 or greater, have blitz, and they cost 1 less to blitz out. So blitz is a mechanic from New Capenna where you can cast the spell from your graveyard or just cast it for its blitz cost, and it gains haste, and in the end step you sacrifice it, and if you do, draw a card. Oh no, when it dies, draw a card.
You're really, really close. So each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater, well done, you got that, has blitz, and it's equal to the mana cost.
Sure.
But blitz spells, his next line of text says, blitz costs you pay cost 1 less for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone.
Oh, that's right. He scales with the game. So the more times you cast him, the bigger reduction you get, which can be really relevant.
Yeah, so the first time you cast him, basically your blitz cost is reduced by 1. So obviously he's giving your mana 4 or greater spells a blitz cost. So now they're like 3 to blitz out, right? And then if he dies, goes back to the command zone, you cast him again. He's been cast twice, so now they cost 2 less.
Yep. Super cool design, by the way.
Really cool art too. Very creepy dude with a lot of vials in front of him.
It's a really cool deck because it feels very Jundy in that it's very very attack oriented, but also things dying draws you cards. So
it's good value. Like you slam a big thing, get some value out of it that turn, and then it's gone.
Definitely. Henzi's an interesting one because I think you do want Henzi to come out as soon as possible, but you can't cheat ahead on mana without fast mana or a turn 1 ramp spell.
True.
Because otherwise, let's say you ramp on turn 2, on turn 3 you'd have 4 mana, but then Henzi only costs 3 anyway. So you would have cast Henzi on turn 3 anyway if you just hit your land drop.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. But you definitely want to cast Henzi first. And I will say, even though Henzi wants to come out early, you want a lot of mana to cast. Like, this is a big bombs kind of deck.
Yeah.
So I could see an argument for still ramping quite a lot, even though you don't need it to reach your commander. Even though your commander wants to come out early, I think ramp would still be pretty good in this deck.
I can still see an argument to play quite a bit of ramp here because even in the scenario that you presented earlier where on turn 2 you cast like an Arcane Signet, turn 3 if you hit a land drop you got 4 mana, I would even say on turn 3 if you ramp again, like if you have another ramp spell, then on turn 4 you have maybe 6 mana. That means you can cast Henzi and a 3-drop.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think there is an argument to maybe include more ramp. And also in the scenario that Henzi just gets removed a million times, it's now almost, even though you're getting value off casting him multiple times in the command zone. There is a point where it's okay, I'm not paying 10 as my command attacks.
No,
I still want to cast these bombs in my hand.
Yeah.
I now have enough mana to do so.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about is a slightly older commander. It's not very old at all. Prosper Tomebound.
It's weird that he feels old to us now.
Well, relative to the other ones in the list, he is... AFR, I think, is over a year ago now.
Yeah, well, we did Baldur's Gate recently, so we've had 2 sets.
It's been a while. So Prosper Tomebound, for 2 black-red, you get I think he's a 1/4 with Death Touch.
He's a tiefling, I remember
He's a tiefling something. Tiefling Warlock? I think he's a Tiefling Warlock. In the beginning of the end step, you exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you can play that card. And whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a treasure token.
Close. Whenever you play a spell. Whenever you play a card from exile.
That's right, because if you get lands, then
yeah.
when you do the land from exile, you actually make a treasure, which is really good.
1/4 with Death Touch. I love the art on this again. It's super
really cool. Really
it's
cool
like a
commander.
Chained up book. He was in one of the AFR precons, I think.
Yeah. It was specifically, he was the helm of the...
Oh, he was.
The black-red precon. This is a good example, I think, of that commander that can come out whenever, because he's drawing you cards and ramping you.
Oh yeah, he ramps you on the box as well. Like he says on the tin, I'm going to give you some acceleration here. Might be burst into the fact that it's a treasure, and it's only temporary, but like... If you're doing it, playing enough spells from exile, you're kind of you end up in this loop, and I've seen it a lot with Prosper players, where they're like, all right, I cast this Reckless Impulse from exile, create a treasure, exile 2 more cards, cast something else, make another treasure.
It like really snowballs. This commander.
It's really cool to watch.
Yeah, it's a great design and a really cool deck. I think you could play him early. Like you could play a Mana Rock on turn 2 so that you can cast him on turn 3,
which I think is really strong because it draws an additional spell.
That would be totally reasonable. I could also see an argument for like setting up the pieces of your, like I know some people at our store play Zorn in the deck, the creature that if you would make treasures you make twice as many instead.
It's good. It is good.
That card is going to be nuts when you have Prosper down. So like, I could also see an argument for like spending turns 1 to 3 setting up like your exile sort of stuff.
Your exile payoffs.
Yeah, or even like your, put your Valakut Exploration on the battlefield.
Even your treasure payoffs. I know a lot of people build Prosper as a treasure tribal deck.
It works pretty well at it.
I mean, you can play, what's the black one that says win the game if you have 10 treasures? Revel in Riches.
Revel in Riches.
Yeah.
Revel in Riches.
I know a lot of people build this as a Revel in Riches deck.
Yeah. No, I can see that for sure. Well, I hope we've illustrated with those examples that, like, you don't have to ramp. You definitely can.
No, and some decks want you to,
yes.
and some decks you don't have to.
Yeah, so we're sort of really trying to lend credence to this argument that Sam Black's making, which is that, like, some decks actually would prefer to have high impact, low mana value spells rather than ramping.
Yeah.
So if we weren't playing rocks, and I think just in general, it's probably a good idea to make our low mana cost spells really count, especially if we're not going to play ramp. They need to do a lot on their own. Like, we can't be playing some of the spells that we might get away with in a higher mana curve deck because we need to, like, make every spell really worth the mana.
I see where you're going with this now. So now we've identified that usually, like, rocks and little ramp pieces kind of sit at this low mana curve. What would it look like if we replace them with spells that actually impact the game?
Or even, like, half-half, right?
Yeah,
like,
and I honestly think a half-half approach is really good. You get the best of both worlds in that scenario.
Definitely you do. So, like, just some examples. I mean, we mentioned Aristocrats before, so these are decks that want to sacrifice things for value. There's a bunch of cards that are really low costed that are great in this deck that aren't mana rocks. LS Ilkor, I believe his name is.
Oh, yeah, the legendary white-black. Whenever a creature ETB is under your control, you gain a life, and whenever a creature dies, your opponents lose a life.
Yes.
Pretty good.
Really, really strong.
Won me a pre-release.
Oh, yeah. You had 2 copies, right?
Yeah, I had 2 copies in the Abzan Squirrel build that I went for.
Wild. Could love pre-release for that. Viserys here, the 1 mana creature that just says sack a creature, scry 1.
Sack outlet.
Great sack outlet. Vampiric Rites is one that I've been playing recently and really enjoying. This is that 1 mana enchantment that you can pay 1 and a black and sacrifice a creature to gain a life and draw a card.
Oh, that's pretty good.
And it's instant speed. So you just like sit it there on the side of the board, and then when someone board wipes, you're like, okay, I'm going to respond, draw some cards. Like, in a similar vein, in a Flicker deck, you have cards like Charming Prince that can fit this low mana curve thing. Resolute Reinforcements is one I've been trying in my Flicker deck recently. This is a 2 mana 1/1 with flash. When it ETBs, you make a soldier creature token. So in a Flicker deck,
that a bunch of times, that's a lot of soldiers.
And it's actually a rare example of a low mana cost creature that creates a body on ETB. There's not very many of those. Life gain, you've got cards like Voice of the Blessed, Serra Ascendant, Ivory Tower, Reanimator decks, you could play Stitcher Supplier, Ghoulcaller's Bell, Milliken. There's lots of really high impact low mana
Zombie
spells.
Infestation and discard decks, love that card.
Yes.
So good.
Oh, so strong. I think the one thing I will say that you should do, regardless of whether you're going to go, all the way in on the ramp or not ramp at all, or somewhere in the middle, you need to hit your land drop every turn. I think it's super underrated how important it is, especially when you get to turns 3, 4, or 5. I know JLK, for instance, is like adamant that hitting your 5th land drop is crucial in Commander.
It will win or lose you the game. And I saw this a lot just recently in a game I played online where I literally got to 4 mana, and that was with a rock. So I had a Talisman of Indulgence and 3 lands, and that's all I had, and then missed my 4th and 5th land drop.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get over the line. So what I was doing was casting a 2-drop and a 3-drop, sure, or like a 1-drop, 2-drop, great.
Yeah.
But everyone else was then casting 2 3-drops.
Yeah.
And that they were running away with the game and leaving me in the dirt.
Well, the funny thing that happens is when you lay out all those rocks or whatever and then miss land drops, is by the time you get to like turn 6, you actually probably have 6 mana anyway.
Yeah.
So, the difference is you spent your turns casting mana rocks while other people might have been doing other
You're
things.
not actually accelerating if you're still on curve and spending mana to just be on curve.
Yeah, really what you want if you're going to be ramping is you want like 8 mana on turn 6, right? And to do that, you're going to need to hit your land drops. So the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to include at least some card draw that is low mana value and doesn't require a specific board state in order to dig for cards. So, for example, cards like Shamanic Revelation, like 3 green, this draws you a card for each creature you control, has other text on it. It's a great card, a really good card in a creature-based deck.
But it's terrible if you only have 1 creature.
Yes, and especially if it's turn 5 and you're digging for that next land.
Yeah.
You don't want to pay 5 mana and draw 1 card. That's a big splashy spell for later, but you can't use that card to dig for lands, or it's not very good at it.
Even like Treasure Cruise is 7 and a blue. It's like a great card draw spell because you can delve that 7 in your graveyard.
It can be late game very easily, pay a blue, draw 3 cards.
It can be Ancestral Recall late game, which is crazy.
Yes.
But it requires a bunch of cards in your graveyard to delve away. So yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, unlikely for that to be the case early game as well. So instead of those, you can try cards like Faithless Looting, I think, is like played in a lot of formats for good reason.
Faithless Looting's good because that flashback, man. It's so underrated. Like late game, again, if you're digging for the win con, I've got Faithless Looting in my bin. I can just Faithless Looting, dig a bit more.
Also, a lot of the decks that play Faithless Looting want stuff in their graveyard anyway, so you get to draw 2 cards that you want, get rid of 2 that you want in your graveyard already. Frantic Search is exactly the same, more or less. Same
can be basically free.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the card Keen Duelist. This is like the
I need
knockoff
one of
Bob.
these. I need one of these in my Euroko deck because in my Euroko deck this would be nuts.
Wild. So for reference, it's very similar to a card called Dark Confidant, which in your at the beginning of your upkeep you reveal the top card of your library. You lose life equal to its mana value, and then you put it into your hand. So it basically draws you a card, but it costs you quite a lot of life. But it's really low cost. It's 1 and a black. It's very cheap. Keen Duelist is a really fun inversion of this that's built specifically for Commander. It's like from a Commander deck, where instead you and an opponent do that. Like you flip the top card, but you lose life equal to the other player's mana value.
Yeah, so this is actually a really good card in decks that have a low mana curve. Because, in a deck that has a high mana curve. Because you're basically doming your opponent for what you have.
Your Euroko deck, if you have Draco on top of your library, you're like, cool, reveal Draco, you take 16, you reveal the land, I'll take 0.
Yeah.
We both draw a card, yours costs 16 life, mine costs 0 life.
But, in fairness, thinking about, our mana curve, if you see a deck at the deck at the table that's that is a low mana curve deck, target that player with the Keen Duelist. Being aware of mana curve with this card, it can be game ending.
It also can make you some friends, which I really like. If someone's really behind, you can give them a card and they don't feel bad about the life, so you kind of get to deal 5 damage to them for free and you get friendship out of it. It's a fun card.
It definitely won't feel like that with Euroko.
No, it will not.
Reveal Expropriate. Would you mind taking 9 damage from me?
Oh, disgusting. All of that low mana curve card draw that doesn't require a specific board state to draw cards, that's what's gonna help you hit land drops, and that's what's gonna be really, really important. And the key takeaway here, and I remember hearing this on Command Zone way back, is you can draw into lands, you can draw into mana, you can draw into ramp, you cannot ramp into card draw.
Or you can't ramp into just spells to cast.
No.
You can have one in your command zone, sure. Like, you can ramp into that commander, but once your commander's down, like, is cool.
Yeah.
Are you drawing cards from it?
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, I think, and I actually saw a tweet recently from Rachel Weeks, who, as you know, I think is just like the coolest Magic player ever.
Blessed be thy name.
She's recently joined the command zone as a host.
Yeah,
she's had some really cool episodes.
Yeah, and really, really loving Rachel on that.
She's got a really cool vibe. I really like the way that she builds like casual commander decks. But she specifically, there was a tweet that was going around that was like, what's a deck brewing tip you wished you learned earlier? And she quote tweeted it and said, more card draw, less ramp. Which I thought was really interesting, because I think I've definitely fallen in that camp before of having like lots of ramp but not very much card draw, and it will result in you emptying your hand, having 8 mana and nothing to do, and nothing feels worse than that.
I would even expand on that by being like more efficient card draw, less ramp,
definitely.
Or more repeatable card draw. However you want to fill that hole. Like, I think that card draw is the important one to focus on, and I think I even spoke about that in the first episode of deck building where we talked about both ramp and card draw.
Yeah, I think we said both are really, really important, but card draw is like comfortably more important. Definitely
the one.
If you're gonna go, we recommended 10 bits of ramp and 10 bits of card draw in that episode. I am increasingly thinking like if you're gonna go higher on one, go higher on card draw
and drop the ramp.
Yeah, you can drop the ramp if you need to. I think the gist of this whole section, because we're sort of getting to a little bit of an interlude here, we're almost there.
Is it cheap?
You'll find out. You'll find out. Is that I think all of this stuff can be summarized by thinking really carefully about what you want your first, let's say, 5 turns to look like.
Sure.
Because we talked about it when we talked about the commanders.
Yeah.
And how we want to do that. We talked about ramp.
Let's think about the whole deck.
Yeah, think about like what's your strategy and what do you want your board state to look like on turn 5. It sounds really spiky. The first time I heard someone say something like this, I was like, I'm never going to do this. This is like such a waste of time. But like increasingly I'm finding myself thinking like, hold on, like what do I want my deck to sort of vaguely move towards? It doesn't have to be like, I want exactly Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond on the battlefield on turn 5.
Yeah.
It's just like, what am I aiming for? So like as an example, I thought this would be a really interesting one to start with, actually. Your Yuriko deck, which you just mentioned.
Yeah.
What if you had to outline, like, the ideal first turn, like, 5 turns?
I can tell you the dream first turn.
Yeah?
It's a turn 1 unblockable creature. That's what I really want to be playing.
Yeah, right?
Because then on turn 2, if I hit my land drop, which on turn 2 I really hope I do.
It'd be a very greedy hand otherwise.
I should be able to then swing with that unblockable creature and ninjutsu Yuriko in and start progressing this game plan of getting ninja triggers off Yuriko.
Yeah.
But I think, like, okay, so then on
turn 2.
On turn 3, maybe I want to redeploy that unblockable creature because I've got another ninja in hand.
Yeah.
Or I want to set up some kind of top decking situation.
Yeah, this might be the time to pull out Scroll Rack.
Scroll Rack on turn 3 as well is really good because there's not a lot of creatures down. I might be able to swing with Yuriko again and activate Scroll Rack.
Oh yeah, because it's 2 to cast and 1 to activate.
Yeah, that's a pretty good dream.
Totally.
Another situation would be maybe starting to tutor on turn 3.
Oh yeah.
To like put things to the top of the library.
Yeah, Vamp Shooter would be a great time.
Yeah, or and then on turn 4, I start deploying my enhancers like Sakashima where I can copy Yuriko.
Yeah.
And by turn 5-6, I should be goddamn winning that game.
Yeah.
I actually have a lot and basically no card draw in Yuriko, funnily enough, because Yuriko puts a lot of cards in my hand.
Yeah.
And I have a lot less ramp in my Yuriko deck than any other deck.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, you literally outlined it in your first few turns. Like, by turn 3, just by hitting land drops, you're doing almost everything you need to do. Right?
Yeah, 100%. I'm drawing cards as well from my commander. Like, it's good.
So your mana curve can be super, super low, and that actually will work quite well.
It's interesting. If you went onto my Moxfield list and looked at Yuriko, the mana curve looks terrifyingly high. But it's actually not like that. I really should go and use the feature on Moxfield where I can edit the mana cost of cards because
we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, a lot of the cards on Yuriko are like the split cards. So they're either the fuse cards or the aftermath cards where you have to cast it from your graveyard.
Yeah, so they have like effectively 2 mana costs on them, and I think the ruling on this, right, is that the actual mana cost when you reveal it with Yuriko is the
whole
total.
card. Yeah.
So if you have like a split spell that costs like 4 mana on one side and then 5 on the other, that's a 9.
It's 9 CMC on the dome.
It hits you hard.
Yeah, so when you look at my deck list on Moxfield for Yuriko, it will look like the mana curve is whack on it. It looks
Having
like
looked at it, it looks insane.
It's a tabletop almost. Like, it's one drop is like there's lots of them, and then it kind of like stagnates at 2, and then it's weird. It just kind of keeps being level from 3, 4, 5,
and
6.
goes a lot further than a lot of mana curves would go.
To 16
it goes
even.
to 16.
Which is wild.
It is wild.
But it is, if you look at actually what I'm casting and playing in the deck, I reckon if you took out all those exceptions where the only reason I'm running the card is to like reveal them, I reckon the average curve is probably like 2.34 or something like that.
Yeah. Interesting. We're actually going to look at your Yuriko deck a bit later, so that's
cool.
Fun. I think we will. I'm struggling to remember what I've written down. As an example, my Araumi deck.
Another Dimir deck.
Nice. Another Dimir deck, yeah. Sticking to Dimir, your favourite. Second favourite. Araumi is a commander that basically reanimates stuff from your graveyard. I won't go into exactly how it works. But
Encore is a weird mechanic.
It's a
Look
weird
it up in your own
mechanic,
time.
But you basically need to have a creature in your graveyard, and then you have to tap Araumi and activate her ability. But in order to get the creature back and get the copies that you want, you have to have 3 other cards in your graveyard that you want to get rid of. So the way that the Araumi early turns work is I just mill myself as much as I possibly can. I think I have like 3 artifacts that cost 1 mana value that literally do nothing else except say tap, put the mill a card.
Yeah, and then you even have like, even on like the 3 drop, you have like Crow of Dark Tidings as well. Like
lots of like effects that sort of creep up like that. And even my ramp actually in Araumi is like Milliken and Deranged Assistant, which like add a colorless when they tap, but also mill a card. And yeah, like even though my commander costs 3 mana value, I don't want to cast Araumi until I have like some bombs in my graveyard and the ability to cast them. So yeah, I have some mana rocks in the deck, definitely, because like some of the bombs cost a lot of mana and I have to pay that mana cost later. But my early turns, I want it to be like, turn 1, something that mills me. Turn 2, something that mills me. Turn 3, something that mills me. Or card draw or something.
Turn 4, now I maybe can consider getting Araumi
out.
Maybe
cast Araumi turn 4. Turn 5, I might have 5, 6 mana, and then I might encore something.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's kind of how I'm thinking about my early turns, and my curve is kind of built around that, right?
Makes sense. A lot of sense.
That's the way I'm thinking about it. I wanted to ask you about a deck you built recently, exclusively out of cards in your collection.
Oh, I know which one. Yeah,
this is your Ukima, the Stalking Shadow, and Kazua,
the Warrior something or other. It's a partner set of commanders, and it's Sultai. Ukima is a whale wolf that is 1 blue and a black. Such a cool creature type, right?
Never not be funny.
It's hilarious. So Ukima's a whale wolf. She costs 1 blue black and is a 2/2. On card, it says she can't be blocked.
Yep.
Which is
wild.
So cool. On a commander. Yeah. That's sick.
Cool text.
Basically, the main win con of the deck is to go for either commander damage with Ukima, or the second effect on Ukima, which is when she leaves the battlefield. Now, Crucial says leaves. Could go command zone, could go to the graveyard, could be bounced back to hand, could be flickered with an exile spell, whatever. Yep. When she leaves the battlefield, you drain X, where X is her power. So you target an opponent, they lose X, and you gain X.
Yep.
Really, really fun gameplay. I genuinely love how this deck plays.
It suits your strengths of like it's far enough of a departure outside of what you normally play that it looks like fresh and interesting, but you still get to do your thing of like leaving up mana. Like you leave up like Run Away together,
where I can bounce Ukima and something else to drain. Yeah,
it's very you.
It's really cool, and I also love how it does that politics thing of, well, if you remove my commander, you're gonna get drained.
Yeah,
like straight up. It allows me to do those fun politics things. But if you think about how this deck plays out, and now I'm trying to think of like what I would want to be doing on different turns. I think the early game is I want to get the pieces for Ukima set out.
Sure.
Generally things like Swiftfoot Boots are a really good card in this deck, because when I do get Ukima out, I can equip her and start swinging with her and progress that game plan.
Yeah.
I also want to kind of equip her and suit her up with maybe some equipment or even auras. Auras obviously have to be after she's down. But
yes.
Even like, board-wide effects where, creatures get +1/+1 or like those kinds of things.
Oh, Kazura actually puts +1 counters on Ukima when it connects to a player, so that's like another way of getting it higher, yeah.
So yeah, my early turns generally would be ramping, I think, because my commander is 1 blue-black, so it's cheap, but Kazura is 3 and a green. Yeah. So really, my commander package is quite expensive.
Very mana intensive.
Yeah, so I think I want to kind of like ramp out so I can have both of them down and really progress that game plan and buff Ukima with Kazura's effect.
Yeah.
But also, there's a bit of a weird effect that equipment have on your brain. You look at an equipment and go, 2 mana, awesome, I can cast this on turn 2. Always check the equip cost of that equipment. Because it might be tricking you. Yeah, it's a 2 mana equipment, but the equip cost is 4.
Yeah.
So that's really 6 mana to get on your creature.
Yeah.
So in early turns, I actually am like super happy to dump these equipment out onto the battlefield. Just be like, turn 2, bang an equipment, turn 4, bang equipment.
It does let you split your mana across multiple turns, right?
100%.
Like it's not like casting a 5 mana aura. If you have an equipment that costs 2 and then equips for 3, like you actually get to split your mana and use it efficiently, which is nice.
If a Ukima gets destroyed or like removed, I can then use that equipment again because the equipment just falls off.
Yeah, the equipment seems like the secret tech in your commander for sure.
100%. And one of my favorite little bits of synergy in this deck is Vorpal Sword. Love that card. Really, really cheap equipment to get down.
Yeah.
Very mana intensive to equip in terms of color.
Yes.
But it also has an activated ability where if you hit someone with the equipped creature, they lose the game.
I think it's 5 black, and it's only that turn.
Yeah. And the equip cost is black too. Yeah. And in a 3-color deck, I need to have intensive. A lot of black.
But I mean, you've got an unblockable creature in the command zone. I like that tech quite a lot.
It's pretty cool. But yeah, I think my early turns are spent either ramping so I can use my mana to get both my commanders down, or dumping the enhancers in the deck onto the battlefield, like my equipment, my buffing stuff.
Yeah.
And then going into the later game, like turn 5, I think I would probably be turn 6 even casting Ukima and starting to progress that game plan.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Well, yeah, I hope you can see from like just looking at some of our decks that there's like specific game plans that we have, and our mana curve sort of reflects that. And in the second section of the episode, we'll be looking at actually the stats on some of our decks and breaking it down.
Have you been doing some reading?
I've been doing some stats. But before we get to that, we do have to take a moment for a thrifty interlude.
A thrifty interlude. Love it.
So there's lots to come. Obviously, the stats is going to be fun. Lots of stuff to talk about there. But before that, we have a little something to say about a new thrifty card.
It's super cheap. It's pretty good. You should play it in your commander decks.
Yeah, absolutely should. Do you want to read the card I'm going to be featuring this week, James?
I'd love to. I actually love this creature. It's super cool. Today's thrifty interlude card is Generator Servant. For 1 and a red, you get a creature elemental that's a 2/1 that you can tap and sacrifice to add colorless. If this mana was spent to cast a creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. That creature can attack and tap as soon as it comes into play under your control.
I am wasting away. I can feel the weight of time on my weary bones, and the expanse of space in my tired joints, which is not how joints are supposed to feel, I'm told. I toil away, day after day, in this bloody electric room, and is anyone any better off? No! Yes, perhaps far from here, so distant it might as well be another world. Someone turns on the light, or taps relentlessly on an excessively illuminated keyboard, and it was my blood and sweat that made it so, but that is not the world that I inhabit. This world is dark and barren, and it smells kind of salty and weird. Worst of all, as my strength fades, my vicious employer seems only to grow stronger. Perhaps if he was to have a day in the electric room, involuntarily. Get budgeted!
Ooh, that creepy. I wasn't expecting a Shakespearean Australia vendetta story from this card.
It's less funny than some of the other ones that I've done, I'll admit, but
honestly though, this card, I love this card. I actually don't run it in a lot of decks, but I think it's great in my like Gishath deck.
Oh,
super
yeah.
cool in Gish.
Yep.
To ramp out those big dinosaurs, give them haste.
Yep.
It's really good.
Yeah, I actually have recently been trying to build a Rurikthar deck, the Rurikthar the Unbowed.
It's like you take 6 damage if you cast a non-creature
spell. Everyone does. So you have to build your deck with like exclusively creatures. I set myself the goal of trying to build a deck with 50 creatures in it.
Wow.
And I managed to do it, actually.
Nice.
This was one of them. Yeah, super good. You have to find ways of like having creatures that do things that you would normally have a spell for.
Yeah, I mean, you go Reclamation stage instead of the Crossing
Nature's
Grid.
Claim or Crossing Grid. Yeah, exactly right. Well, you can check out these text posts as I write them and release them. They are released every week on a Thursday on our Discord, which is linked in the show notes. And you can see me bring some of these to life as videos on TikTok at G_Commander Community. So check us a follow on there if you want to see them as they come out.
Yeah, and a couple of highlights from this show on our TikTok are being made currently, which is super cool.
You can see some of your favourite moments brought to life in sort of goofy video form.
Might not be your favourite moments, but they're
some
probably
of ours.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Usually just us being super silly.
Yes, absolutely. Let's get back to the stats.
Oh, we're going full. We're actually breaking down the numbers of mana curve. We're doing it.
Now. We're in the mana curve. We've talked about bloody everything you need to know about using it. Let's actually look at what it looks like in some of our decks.
Sure.
So, I'd had to look through all of my decks and all of your decks. I'm not going to say we're going to talk about every single one of them, but we're going to look at...
a long time.
We are, but I thought we'd take a look at some of the ones that have really high mana value and some of the ones that have really low mana value. And I've actually also calculated what our average mana value was across our decks.
Oh, I've never done that myself.
Yeah, I will say that the numbers are a little bit skewed because, as you know, when I build my decks in Moxfield, if I have a spell that costs X, for instance, has an X cost in it, I actually set the mana value, which you can do on Moxfield, to be whatever I would like, sort of on average, have the mana value of X be. But your decks, I noticed, did not do this.
Yeah,
so,
and also, Yuriko is a weird example, again.
Yes, definitely.
So we have to do some, removal of some decks and removal of some data to get this level.
We've got a few different numbers that we throw around because of some of the numbers that are a bit weird. But I'll specifically say that when we're comparing our mana values, it's not necessarily a 1-to-1 because a Pull from Tomorrow in one of my decks has the mana value 5 blue.
But in your deck,
it would just be blue. So that will skew the stats a bit, but it's still close enough that I think it's interesting.
Sure.
So, we'll start with my decks.
Of course.
So, the 3 lowest mana value decks that I have in my collection are my CDH deck.
That does not shock me, really.
Which is the lowest. So that one's got an average mana value of 2.66. Again, if on Moxford, you can just scroll down below the cards to the mana curve sort of graph, and it's just under there.
And your CDH deck is Yushan.
Yes, Yushan Stacks deck. So this is pretty obvious as to why it's so low. CDH decks are trying to influence the game, on turn 1, ideally.
And your list specifically has a load of hate pairs for 2 mana, right?
Yeah,
it's just a lot of those and even small stack pieces.
1 mana value, there's lots of dorks, there's lots of Rule of Law, Deafening Silence is a 1 mana creature, enchantment that I would cast a lot. So trying to influence the game really, really early to slow down everybody else. So that's got 2.66. That's the obvious lowest one. CDH breaks all the rules, as always. My next lowest was Krak and Akroma, my partner commander. This is my weird polymorph list that tries to get basically Zada or Mirrorwing Dragon.
You're one of 2 decks on EDH Rec for this pairing? Is that...
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, sorry. If you go on EDH Rec and you look up this partner pairing, there are, I believe, the last time I checked, there were 2 decks on EDH Rec, and one of them is 100% mine. So it's pretty funny. You look through the list and you kind of can get an idea of exactly what the other person built. Because it's you see a card that says in 50% of decks, and it's yep, that's my one.
Yeah. And that one's in 50% of decks. I don't run that, so it's well done, other guy.
That's in the other one, and then you see the ones that have 100%, and you're okay, we align a little bit.
I mean, this makes sense. There's a lot of low cantrip spells in this deck,
this
right?
is almost exclusively 1 mana pump spells and 2 mana pump spells. Yeah, totally makes sense. The next lowest actually shocked me a little bit. It's Sir Gwyn, my knight artifacty deck, had an average mana value of 2.84.
See, I get why you're surprised on it, but I just, earlier when I was talking about Ukima and Kazar, I'm not shocked because a lot of those, equipments are actually relatively cheap to cast.
But then you have to pay an equip cost.
But the equip cost is a little bit more. But you're benefiting from the fact that Seguin allows you to equip for free.
Yeah.
So I can see why this is actually a lot lower than we would think. And also, there are a lot of really good knights that are 2-3 mana.
Yes. I think the really cool thing about my Seguin deck, and it's... We'll talk a bit later about what the different decks feel like to play, but... it's a deck that actually can afford to empty its hand of all of the knights and all of the equipment, because then when Seguin comes in and I attack and they're all equipped, I draw like 4 or 5 cards on that turn.
Card draw in your command zone is super good.
Yeah. Especially when it's like a late game kind of thing. So I can afford to empty my hand, and then when I get 6 mana, then cast Seguin, and that actually kind of makes sense for the way the deck wants to run.
100%. So what was the other end?
So the high end... my absolute highest deck, I didn't think I'd have any that would break the 4 mark. I have one that has higher than 4 average mana value. 4.23.
Whoa!
It's high. It's my Averna.
You didn't just get over the line. 4.23.
It's comfortably over. Yeah. It's my Averna, the Chaos Bloom deck. This
makes sense.
Cascade landfall deck. So, like, I mean, it plays lots of lands, lots of ways of getting lands. It wants... high cost spells to use the mana on. There's also kind of a secret theme of my deck, which is that I was trying to... There's so few good Cascade spells in Temur colors that I had to like stretch to find ways of casting them multiple times. I think I've talked before about the card Sunken Hope, which I play, which is an enchantment that bounces a creature in every upkeep. That lets me like cascade creatures again. But also the main the best card in the deck is Emoti.
That cares about like 6 drops.
Yes,
as
anything
well,
with mana value 6 or greater has Cascade.
So naturally, you want to actually include some to get benefits.
I include I think there's 3 different creature tutors. All of them are designed to get Emoti, and then once I have Emoti down, I have basically as many 6 drops as I can possibly get that are relevant and good, so that I can trigger Emoti every turn. So 4.23.
4.25 is 4.23. Yeah, you didn't just get over 4.
No,
that's considerable.
It's very, very high. For reference, my next highest deck was my Reese the Redeemed deck, which is...
Really?
Yeah.
Reese is a 1-drop.
I know. Reese had an average mana value of 3.82.
Wow, that's way higher than I thought it was.
Right? So the reason this one is so high, and I think I've talked about this before, this is a deck that I run a lot of ramp in because I know this mana curve is high.
Yeah.
It's because it's I'm always doing secret themes. The secret theme of the Reese the Redeemed deck is Flicker.
Yeah.
And so... But specifically, because it's a token deck, I want to flicker creatures that ETB and make a bunch of tokens. And all of the good versions of this effect cost at least 5 mana. They're often more like 6 or 7. And so I play a load of ramp to sort of offset it, but I have all these creatures that I have to hit before I can flicker them. So
I mean, you're in the right colors of green to do the land ramp and even mana dorks.
There's 4 mana dorks in the deck, I think. Yeah, I really like that because I want to go wide, so it sort of makes sense. And then the third highest of my decks, shocking absolutely nobody, is Kaza Royal Chaser.
That's a big spells deck. It literally has big spells in the name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, this is a testament to the fact that I'm editing the X cost of these spells, because there's a lot of X spells in this deck.
If you didn't, it would probably be very low.
Yeah, it would be a lot lower. It definitely would.
I'd be really interested to do the experiment.
Yeah.
Actually. Let's see what it looks like.
I would be interested. Yeah. So that one had an average mana value of 3.78. And again, this makes a lot of sense because
it's a big spells deck.
And my commander specifically cheats on costs.
Yeah.
And you actually see this a lot in commander that commanders that do this, and we'll see a few actually in your decks specifically.
I'm really curious. I'm almost nervous. I haven't I'm sure you've looked at this before in your own decks because you're an absolute spy.
I have.
Yeah, I've never done this, so I'm actually...
Really?
I've never looked at it on, an average across them.
Sure.
When I'm building a deck, I'll probably look at I will obviously look at the curve.
Yes.
But once I've kind of built the deck, I'm like, yep, cool, that's done, don't need to think about it anymore. Not looked at it from a holistic, what does it look like across all my decks?
Right, gotcha.
So I'm very interested to see the stats you've got.
Well, specifically across all my decks, I have 2 numbers here because... I recall from science when I was studying it back at university that you should ideally eliminate outliers when you're looking at data. And a lot of these decks that I've just specifically spoken about are outliers. They are way higher or lower than they should be. So
For like a specific reason, like their CDH or their...
Or the Averna deck. It's like obviously way higher than it should be. Yeah. So, my average across all of my decks, when I totaled it up, was actually 3.28 average mana value, which sort
sits in that, what we kind of said at the start of the episode.
Yeah, comfy kind of range for a casual deck. My average across all of my casual decks minus Anomaly, so I haven't specifically noted what I had here, but it was basically anything that was really high or really low. So I think I got rid of Kraken and Chroma from this. I got rid of like Averna. I think I even might have cut Kaza, because it's like I'm cheating costs on those ones. Then it was 3.14.
Okay, that's actually a bit lower now.
Yeah.
So yeah, and even then, that is going towards that line of, closer to the 3 being the tip of your bell curve.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice.
Now I did pull some numbers on your decks.
I'm
as
so
well.
curious.
I'd love
so interested
to present my my data to you, my findings.
I feel like I've been put in a lab and you've been watching me for like a week and you're like, he went left in the maze for the cheese. Good, James.
Oh my god, no. So your lowest deck, would it shock you at all to learn that it's Niv Mizzet? Peru?
No, at all.
Your CDH control list.
I mean, even then, like, I probably, if I went in and did the edit on what, like, you know, because I have, like, Force of Will, for example, which is actually 5 CMC, but I always cast it for free.
Yeah,
so
you
realistically,
could edit that to be 0, effectively.
Yeah, which would probably bring it down even more. But what is the average?
2.17.
Yeah, I think that's about what I remember it being.
Very low, and actually, like, even a significant jump below even my stacks list.
Well, yeah, I think with Niv is, like, all the combo pieces are incredibly cheap.
And you love cantrips as well, specifically.
Because you want to dig and shooter to the combo. That's what you want to do. And also counterspells generally are cheap. You want the more efficient counterspells in CDH are very cheap. They're 1-drop, 2-drop max.
Yeah.
Or free. So, yeah.
I think we can agree we're both not shocked to see our CDH decks as the lowest.
Again, CDH breaks the rules.
Yeah, and we want to influence the game as early as possible, so it makes sense. Your next lowest deck, this shocked me actually, was Ukima and Kazua.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, again, the equipment argument.
I think it's the equipment thing, because it's average mana value of 2.5 though, so this is still really, really low. But how interesting, right?
That's wild. That might be... I actually haven't looked at this curve since I built the deck, and I have done a couple of edits since, but, like, that might be the reason why I have no cards in hand by turn 7.
Well, I think it could be a contributing factor,
maybe
I
need to look at some of the lower drop card draw spells.
Yeah, maybe.
I do run
a bit less ramp. You could probably run less ramp,
maybe.
Given how low it seems like most of your spells are. Maybe you could be less...
Fill that middle tier mana curve up with, like, more impactful spells, like the 3-drop equipments that I took out of the deck to put in a ramp spell.
Yeah. This is probably an interesting one where I reckon because you always pay the equip cost for your equipment, you could try editing the cost of all of your equipment to
include the equip.
Yeah, so if it's like a 3-mana equipment that equips for 2, you could try that as 5 and see how that shakes up the curve.
That's interesting.
Anyway, I thought it was really weird, but I think the equipment thing.
The equipment effect. I'm going to call it the equipment effect.
The equipment effect. We love our alliteration, don't we? Your next lowest. This one, I don't know. All the low ones shock me for whatever reason. Like I don't expect them to be super low. Your Atraxa Infect list, which I think you're planning on maybe disassembling soon.
It's being thought about, but that actually doesn't shock me.
No, it doesn't?
No, I mean my Atraxa deck is specifically built to be really low to the ground in the early game, and then proliferate its way to victory. So get at least 1 poison on everyone.
Yep.
So infect everyone at least once, and then kind of pillow fort out and proliferate into the late game.
That makes sense to me.
A lot of the creatures are super small.
Sure.
You know.
Once you have the infect counter, your commander wins the game given enough time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
if everyone's got 1 infect and I cast my commander, 9 turns, people.
Actually, and when I play against your deck, it seems like the priority of the early game, like every turn prior to Atraxa coming out, the priority seems to be just giving everyone a poison counter.
Yeah, it's
and that makes sense to me, right? Because once you've got 1, you can get as many as you want. Yeah,
100%.
Interesting. So that was 2.9, by the way. So still below 3.
Still below 3 is actually that shocks me a little bit because generally, like the infect creatures like higher
Yeah, like
costed.
4-drops and stuff.
Yeah, three mana is usually like the tip top area of like a really good, efficient, low to the ground infect creature.
Yeah.
And the 4-drop, 5-drops, and even 6-drops infects are like the late game big value, like Phyrexian Swarm Lord or something like that.
Yeah.
They're like the late game, I need to win, put something down that's definitely going to win on its next turn.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, still below 3, wow.
I know. Your highest deck.
I've got a couple in mind that I could think of.
This first one didn't shock me at all.
Okay.
Gishath, Sun's Avatar.
All right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Your average mana value was 4.49.
Holy shit. Oh my god.
So for reference, Gishath is like a
4.5, like 4.49.
Yeah.
Wow.
So do you want to outline why you think it's so high? It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. So
for those who don't know Gishath.
Firstly, Gishath is 5 red, white, green.
Yeah.
So Gishath is already probably skewing this mana curve in like the top end.
It's pulling it higher.
It's huge, but like I run a lot of ramp in Gishath because I want to get Gishath as early as possible because the rest of the deck is packed to the brim with big dinosaurs.
Huge dinosaurs.
Big dinosaurs tend to cost a lot of mana. Because the reason why there's so many of those big dinosaurs in the deck is because when Gishath deals damage to an opponent, I reveal that many cards from the top of my library and put all dinosaurs revealed this way onto the battlefield under my control.
It's such cool design.
It's like, really fun.
It's so difficult to break. Like the probably the strongest thing you can do with Gishath is there's a couple of tutors that tutor creatures to the top of your library. I know you're playing one of these now, I think. It's like green,
Congregation
white.
at Dawn is the card. Shout out to Nick that recommended me that card.
You put like 3 creatures on top of your library,
Instant
right?
speed too.
Yeah, wild.
I could
you
run
can do it in
Worldly Tutor
response to
as well.
the damage trigger.
Yeah, you can. It's like Yuriko.
That's wild.
Yeah, instead of doing Vampiric Tutors at the
Oh
top,
my
you Congregation at Dawn, Zetalpa, and Galta, and all these massive dinos.
That's fun.
But 4.49, holy cow.
It makes sense, right? It's similar to the Wizards deck. Like, you're cheating the mana cost on all those creatures. You're almost never casting them. So, like, they are skewing your mana curve way up, but it's just because, like, they get cheated out. You don't almost ever actually pay for them.
Even thinking about my early turns with Gishath, it's like turn 2, ramp. Turn 3, ramp again. Turn 4, maybe cast Explosive Vegetation and the path one, that like the path to whatever, that's also 4 mana that gets 2 basics to the battlefield. So I'm running like 4-drop ramp spells. Yeah. Because I need to get to my 8 mana commander.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. That's also pulling the curve up a little higher. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me, for sure. Your next highest deck, and I will note here that I had not put my precon into my decks, but you have yours because you've upgraded one of them, I think, with a few cards.
I also just like now to keep a good view of what my collection includes.
Sure.
So I like knowing that I on Mox Field I actually have folders for different levels of decks. So I have like a precon folder, a CDH folder, and then a casual folder.
Not so organized, but I kind of like that actually. So the precon that you have on there, because you've upgraded it very, very slightly, I believe, is Land's Wrath. This is the Naya, Obun is the commander, precon, and the average mana value of this deck was 4.13.
Doesn't shock me. I mean, weirdly, I did take out a basic land to put in the Felidar Retreat.
Yeah.
Which is a 4 mana spell.
Yes.
But in fairness, when I bought that precon, there was a lot of lands in it, and I was like, I actually can afford to go down one land.
Yeah. I think this is probably around the average mana value of a precon, if I had to guess. They're definitely a lot higher than most decks that we're building. And again, like we said earlier, a lot of the time when we upgrade these precons, we literally just take out like 3 6-drops and put in 3 3-drops because it improves the consistency of us having things to do.
Yeah. Pretty much every white precon will have Sun Titan, even if it isn't going to be really good in the deck.
Most precons that include white have Zetalpa in them, which is an 8 mana, admittedly like a creature with great text on it, and when you're new to Magic, you're like, oh my god,
it's
I have this 4/8
with
flying, double strike, vigilance, like all this stuff. But like it's not, if you're not playing dinosaurs, it's not really doing almost anything for your deck, really.
Yeah, in my Gishath deck, it's good.
Yes, it's sick in there. Absolutely it is. Congregation at Dawn, Zetalpa.
It's a good hit.
It's a good one. Your next highest one is another one that didn't shock me at all. It's your Yelava deck. This was given to you as part of the Chris Kringle event that I helped to facilitate with the Greensboro Commander community. And this one cheats out big spells, right?
Yeah, this is the one that I thought was going to be my highest.
Sure.
To be
So
honest.
it's a 4.06, by the way. So we're still above 4.
3. Yeah, it's still above 4. Wow. No, I'm not shocked at this one. This one is all about getting your Laver into the battlefield. When she enters, you exile a bunch of cards from your library and your opponent's.
Mm-hmm.
When she attacks, you can cast an instant or sorcery spell from the exiled cards without paying its mana cost.
Sure.
So your game strategy is get your Laver into the battlefield, get big spells off the top of your library, and cheat out maybe an 8 mana sorcery on turn 5.
This is the only time I've ever seen anyone play Thesis. Thesis?
Oh, for thesis.
Thesis.
I thought you were saying thesis. I was like, what card's that?
No, I was saying Thesis. It's a
silly card. I actually recently took it out of the deck.
Oh no! How sad.
It's a really cool card.
It's good to cheat out. It basically destroys a creature, and it does the Swords to Plowshares thing, but you gain the life. So
it's whack.
Destroys a creature, and I think you gain life equal to its toughness or something.
It also has Suspend, which is pretty handy because you can cheat it out that way.
You can.
It's Suspend 3, I think. It's not great. It's not a good card.
No.
When you can cheat out big mana spells, it's fun to be like, I cast on your creature.
I could see why you took it out. Like, it's the kind of thing, because you get a lot of cards with your Laver. I think people underestimate, like, it's 4 cards from everyone, minimum. The first time you cast it.
Yeah, and so, like, obviously, sometimes I'll whiff from an opponent and I won't get an instant sorcery, but my deck is stacked with them.
Yes.
So I know I'm getting something from my deck.
Yeah.
And then, once she gets removed, the next time I cast her, it changes how many cards you exile based on how much money you spent to cast her.
Yeah.
So when
it might be 6, and then it might be 8.
Exactly. So as the late game goes, like, I can cast your Laver, put Swiftfoot Boots on it, and now I've got maybe 15, no joke, like sometimes 15 instants or sorceries that I could potentially cast.
And if you had Thesis in that pile, I think you wouldn't pick it. Like, it just destroys a creature, right? It's a targeted removal spell.
I would much rather cast an extra turn spell or Cruel Ultimatum or like something wild.
Many other options. Yeah, I totally agree. So your average across all of your casual decks, I believe I didn't include the CDH deck in your big number, same as mine, was 3.57. Which is
so a little bit higher than yours.
Quite a bit higher than mine. I then did the same thing I did with mine, where I removed some outliers. I did note which ones your outliers were, which was Yuriko.
Totally fair.
Yeah, really high cost on that one. Dinosaurs.
Really fair to do for that one. 4.5. Wow, yeah.
The Precon and your CDH deck. I believe those are the only ones I subtracted. And then your average mana value was 3.29. So
that's more reasonable.
Still quite a bit higher than mine. And worth noting again that because you haven't edited your mana costs, your average mana value is probably... Because mine was like 3.14 in this category.
Yeah.
The distance between my average mana value and yours is actually probably likely to be slightly bigger.
Because mine should be, mine spring should be listed as 5.
Yes, if we're consistent across how we're both tracking, then
I mean, I think that does actually show a little bit more to our playstyles. I'm a bit more of a Timmy, and you're a bit more of a Spike. So you're looking for more efficiency, but I'm looking to do a big splashier thing.
I think that's completely right. I also think about the fact that, like, if I imagine a typical James game, you are the kind of person who goes like, I think at our store it's now considered Jamesing all over the place when you empty your hand of mana rocks.
Yeah, I've heard from across our local game store of, oh no, I Jamesed all over the table, which is not a thing you want to hear in a public space.
Oh god. Anyway, it's like, you know, you empty your hand of all the mana rocks.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, like, because you play, I think in the deck building template, we talked about how you play closer to the 15 mark of ramp spells, right?
Yeah.
I'm sort of closer to the 10 on average across my decks. So yeah, the fact that you're ramping more means you can justify a higher mana curve, right?
Because I have the mana to do these splashiest.
Yeah, if I have an 8-drop in one of my decks and I'm running like 8 pieces of ramp, it's going to take me many turns to get to 8 mana. But like, you could justify an 8 mana card in one of your decks pretty easily. You could probably cast it on turn 5. I wouldn't be shocked to see that.
And I definitely do. And I think that's why, like, you know, most of my games either end with a big splash or end with me losing. It's like, it's those two options. But I have recently started to kind of look at my decks with this lens of, why am I actually ramping in this deck?
Sure.
And I am looking at the lower mana curve, and it's specifically the deck that I'm looking at it at the moment with is actually my Liesa Shroud of Dusk deck.
Oh, interesting.
And that's the deck I'm kind of currently tinkering with, because I've found that in white-black, the strategy that I'm going for, this life gain, life drain, death and taxes kind of vibe, is there's so many more things on turns 1 and 2 you can start doing to progress your game plan that is just going to like do way more than casting Arcane Signet.
Right.
So things like a turn 1 Esper Sentinel is way better than a turn 1 Soul Ring, because Esper Sentinel puts a tax piece on the ground and is starting to draw you cards.
Yeah.
But also like even a Talia on turn 3 is better than ramping out. It's just making your opponents cast, because I want to sit there and play a long game. So I'm okay with just hitting my land drops every turn.
Sure.
Slowly getting there, because my deck is designed to go for the long game.
Yeah.
So if I'm still casting my 8 drop on turn 8, that's actually totally fine.
Because you can justify the fact that the game's going to go that long.
Exactly.
Because you're slowing everyone down.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I've started to take this approach. Like I used to run, I think, my current Liaison deck on Moxfield is still running like maybe 12 Mana Rocks, I think, currently, or like 12 pieces of ramp. I think Cryptghast is listed as one of the ramp pieces in it. So technically not ramp, but
card's just great.
I also run Urborg, so why the hell wouldn't I not?
No, absolutely.
But like, I think I'm now going, right, I would much rather run another effect that maybe gains me life, maybe like a Cruel Celebrant. Like, it's not fantastic, but like, or even a Blood Artist, because that sees opponents' creatures, and that's that life gain, life drain effect.
Sure.
So maybe I take out the Sky Diamond, sorry, not Sky Diamond, the Charcoal Diamond to put in a Blood Artist.
Yeah.
That'd be a better card, right?
Yeah, that seems like a decent trade to me, especially based on some of the stuff we were outlining earlier. So, I sort of wanted to open up the floor a little bit here towards the end of this episode and just like talk about how this sort of shakes up. We've looked at the numbers, we've talked about like how we justify our mana curves. I was thinking specifically of those high mana value decks that we have. How do we get away with having that higher mana value? Like I know for me personally, I'm playing more. We talked about that spectrum of recommended amount of ramp between 10 and 15. I'm going way closer to 15, sometimes even up to 20 in my decks that are like super high.
Like Averna definitely wants
Averna
to be
has
doing
like
that.
22, I think, bits of ways to ramp in the deck.
Massive.
Because it's like it's what the deck wants to do, and then the curve actually supports that ramp sort of strategy.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, you maybe not be doing so much on turn 4, but when you get to turn 6, you are casting a 10 drop kind of thing. And cascading 6 times.
Exactly right.
The effect is stronger.
Yeah. So what are some of the other ways that you think, like, so obviously we talked about your Dinos deck has like is filled with ramp. I suppose there are always going to be these decks that are complete anomalies. We talked about Yuriko. That one just completely breaks the rules because it's like...
It's such a weird deck.
It has a high mana curve, but the spells that have high mana curves are never being cast for what they are listed as actually being on the mana curve.
Or I'm cheating them with like Bolas' Citadel.
Definitely. There's like a lot of commanders as well that let you cheat costs, and we found that with a few of our decks, Kaza specifically, and Gishath.
And Yeleva.
Yeleva, So decks that cheat on costs obviously can afford to have this higher mana
Even
curve
my
as well.
Scarab God deck can kind of sit in that category.
That's true. You have quite a few, I've noticed, to have like a few like 8 and 7 drop creatures. Because
Sphinx of the Second Sun, Sheoldred,
You can justify that because it effectively costs you 4 when you exile it with Scarab God's ability. That makes a lot of sense to me too. And then for the decks that we are building sort of more with this idea, the Sam Black maybe philosophy of like slightly lower curve, slightly higher impact plays early, what do they feel like to play, do you reckon?
The thing that jumps to my mind immediately, which we said right at the top of the episode, is options.
Yeah.
You are constantly thinking of like, oh, what can I do now? I've got, plenty enough mana to do 3 things in hand. Which 3 things do I want to do?
Yeah, I've got choices here.
Yeah, I've weirdly found that with my Tornos deck recently, but it's almost, the effect is slightly different because like everything's so cheap, but the activated abilities on board are my options.
Yeah.
So it's a very similar effect when I'm playing my CEDH deck, is what I get when I really feel this.
Yeah.
The mana curve is so low, I'm like, right, do I want to counterspell this spell now, or do I want to do 2 cantrip spells and dig for my combo?
Or even with the counter spells, do I Narset's Reversal? Do I Swan Song?
Yeah.
Like, those are interesting lines of play as well.
Super cool feeling when you're like, ooh, in response, let me think about this, because I know I want to do something. I'm just not entirely sure what to do yet.
Yeah, totally. That definitely resonates with the decks that I have that have a lower mana curve. My Knights deck feels like that, where it's like I often have like a full grip and I'm just deciding what the sequence of plays should be.
Which Knights support the Knights currently on board? What do I deploy first?
Which equipment kind of like bolster the Knights? There's a really interesting like interaction between the Knights and the equipment, where some Knights have keywords and then some equipment give keywords, and so you kind of want to match the Knight up with the equipment that it wants.
Yeah,
because obviously, like if a creature has vigilance and you give it a sword that says gets +2/+0 and has vigilance on it,
it's not as good as giving it trample.
No, absolutely
exactly,
right. Yeah. So you have this kind of interesting thing of shuffling swords around, which is kind of fun.
And with Seguin, that's really easy to do.
Yes. I love having a bit of a sit down and going like, oh, I could put that there or there or there or there. I swap this here. Oh, actually, never mind. I swap it back.
What's really funny is like their legal game actions. You can just be like, all right, I'll equip this here. That's one game action. I'll equip this here.
All of them are going on the stack. Yeah, that's true. I think the other thing I notice about the decks I have that have this low mana curve is like so much of the time I very rarely like have nothing to do. I think sometimes when you have a super high curve deck, there will just naturally be turns where you go, okay, I've got 5 mana and I literally only have a 6-drop in my hand. Like, I cannot even do anything right now. That it happens, it can always happen statistically, obviously.
But like, even if you miss land drops, like your curve's so low, you're like, on turn 4, I missed 2 land drops, so I've only got 2 lands. That's okay, I can still deploy 2 creatures. Yeah. Because they're both 1-drops.
Exactly.
Sweet. Yeah. Maybe one of them draws me cards, gets me to those land drops. Yeah, I really like that.
I super highly recommend. I've been like lately really focusing on hitting my land drop every turn. I really highly recommend, especially when it gets late in a game of Commander, when you draw like 10 cards and you've got 15 cards in hand and you're choosing what to discard, keep 1 land in your hand. It's so easy to be greedy and go, I'll just keep the 7 best spells. Hitting your land drop on that next turn gives you access to all the spells in your hand.
How many times have you heard the phrase, if I had 1 more mana, I would have won? I have said that multiple times. Yep. And with this line of thinking, I do it a lot with CDH because my Niv Mizzet deck wheels a lot and generally wheels like up to more cards in hand and stuff like that. Yep. I now make sure I will keep a land in hand to play on the next turn.
It makes a big difference. Really, like just as a thought experiment for yourself, try doing this in your next 5 Commander games. I promise you it will make a world of difference.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say I noticed about decks that have a low mana curve, they feel really consistent. It feels like they don't play the same. As we've said, we sort of move away from tutors a little bit in the way that we play.
We love variance in our games.
We do love variance in our games a lot. But the decks that I have that have this low mana curve manage to sort of get the ball rolling in the way that they want to, like very frequently.
Yeah, and also very early too, which I like. You don't feel like you're searching for the way to turn the deck online. It kind of just naturally goes online from turn 1.
Yep.
I like that.
Definitely.
Wow, mana curve's a big topic.
It's a huge topic. Well, mana is arguably the most important resource for you to manage in Commander, and your mana curve should be at the forefront of your deck building. Casting spells at the right time and bringing in your Commander at the opportune moment will result in extremely rewarding gameplay. Likewise, giving this no thought may result in occasions where you end up with nothing to do or are forced to play spells in a poor order. Master deck builders will arrive at decks that feel interactive, sequential, and strategically consistent, and your mana curve is intrinsically connected with this. So,
Space Commanders, command receives. Woo, that was your big one.
That was a big one.
Big curve on this episode. We had like a big chunk of information at the start of the episode. And tailored down to more like end game stuff.
I like what you did there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, to the listeners, do you feel commanded? What do your mana curves look like on Mox Field? Definitely share your deck list with us. And have we convinced you to build your curves any differently? I just read that in the script. Build your curves.
Curvaceous decks.
Back to the skin again.
And also, if you want to get in contact with us, you can, of course, get in contact with us in many different ways. You can go into our show notes, jump on our Twitter, send us an email, or best place to do it is joining our Discord and join in on the really recently big conversations going on in our Discords.
Lots of great conversations.
Yeah, and lots of games. We've been playing a lot of Spell Table with listeners and our own play group, and it's a really fun place to be, that Discord right now. So go down to the show notes, jump in. Like, we'll welcome you immediately. If you see us
Absolutely.
online, send us a DM. We'd love to play a game with you.
Absolutely would. And please don't forget as well, if you have the time, to leave us a review on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on. So that would be mainly Spotify and Apple Podcasts, based on the stats. The stats, we love them so much. You can't do that on Google Podcasts. So if you listen to Google Podcasts, just tell your friends about us.
Yeah, or even if you listen on Apple Music, tell your friends about us.
Yeah, tell your friends about us.
Tell your friends.
We'd like to say thank you as well, once again, to Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring our podcast. We're sponsored.
It's real.
It's real. They create some really fantastic deck boxes, sleeves, binders, other gaming accessories. We have used their sleeves before. We really like them. They're based in Melbourne.
Deck sleeves, decks with their sleeves on it. And I'm actually looking currently at their 360 slot binder to buy. I need a new binder.
Is this the one with like 4 across?
It's super nice.
The thing that I realized about that someone pointed out to me, I think it was in the Professor Tulane Community College review, you can put play sets.
Yeah, I know. And when you play formats like Pauper or Modern or Pioneer,
you want to show off your playset of Lightning Bolt or something.
It's nice.
Yeah, do that.
It's the gravy.
You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au. It's linked in the show notes as well. Yeah. Well, it's tradition, James, at the end of the episode to planeswalk out of
Get on out of Magic. And we are going to be planeswalking to a bit of a weird place.
Weird place?
Have you ever heard of the transsexual plane of Transylvania?
Oh my god. I know where you're going with this only because you told me about it. You went last night,
Last night. I couldn't resist talking about this because it was such a fun experience.
Sure.
Basically, if you haven't picked up on the reference, I went and saw Rocky Horror Picture Show last night.
Yep.
However, it was a call and response version of the show, where the movie plays on a big screen in a theater, and they have like performers of all different varieties, like circus performers, drag queens, actors, whatever, kind of playing out the show as the movie goes on a stage in front of the screen.
Cool.
It's really fun, but the coolest bit about it is because it's a call and response show, the audience is incredibly involved.
Sure.
When you rock up, they actually give you like props to be included in the show.
No. What do they give you?
So if you've never seen it before, have you?
No, I haven't.
Wild to me. It's such a good film. They give you rice at the start because there's a wedding at the start of the show.
Oh.
So when the wedding happens, you're meant to like throw
the
rice. And there's like bits in the show where like they're in a pool. So naturally these performers in drag come out with water guns and start spraying the audience and all that kind of stuff. It was such a good experience. And I went with like a big group of friends. I think it was 10 of us that went.
Wow, huge group.
Really big group. We were sat at like the back of the cinema. And then we saw on the like left-hand side because we were in the balcony.
Sure.
We saw on the left-hand side, there's actually like a side door on the balcony that had like a big platform.
Oh.
And we're like, why don't we just go down there and like...
Cheeky, love it.
It was a bit cheeky. We also moved, there was a big plant pot in the way and we moved that towards the fire escape. So if the place caught fire, we would have all been trapped. But we moved it and we had this whole balcony to ourselves. So when the Time Warp came on, you know that song?
Yes, I do know the Time Warp.
Yeah, let's do the time.
Yeah.
When that came on, we were all on the balcony dancing our hearts out. We were having a great time.
Beautiful.
It was a really, really fun night. And if you ever get the opportunity to go to a call and response show, do it. It is like, if you suffer from social anxiety, maybe take a back seat. But if you are the type of person that doesn't mind like yelling stuff out during a show, really good fun. I think it's super cool.
In this case as well, like this was quite a large crowd, so I guess
it's like 800 people there. It was big,
So there's a different like sort of tier of call and response kind of theater where like if you were going to like an intimate small thing, totally understand the social anxiety of being like I don't want to be like directly spoken to by a performer in the show, but in this case it was more just like audience participation. Like
it definitely was.
Yell and have a blast.
There was like a bunch of like different rules, like when certain things happen in the show, like the narrator in Rocky Horror says on a quiet night a quiet night out, he says, and every time he says that, the audience has to yell, "It was a night in!" So every time he says a quiet night out it was a night in.
Oh my god.
Really good fun. What
Madness.
Was even funnier in that whole event was my partner Theo had never actually seen Rocky Horror before.
Oh.
So the whole experience was just just so overwhelming for them.
Imagine.
It was like their eyes were like saucepans, like super wide, and like there's so many things going on here. It was really good fun. They ended up having a great time, and they just they enjoyed just watching our group of friends dance like idiots on a balcony.
You got to do that sometimes. You got to have a little bit of that in your life.
Let loose.
I think.
Let loose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll catch you in the next one.
Yeah. Bye, Commander players.